We are finally going to write the driver for our budget program. It's going to demonstrate using that static class variable. It's going to demonstrate using an array of objects. Our array will be an array of budget objects. And also, again, emphasize the use of inline methods and how it looks a little bit different. Whenever you are writing classes and you have a header file which is separating the class code from your driver code, you have to #include the header file here, and it is inside quotes because it is a user-defined class. I have created a local method here to print a report, and so I also have here a print report, and I want to point out that I'm passing in an array. And so the array gets passed in using this notation here where it's budget bracket. The bracket right here indicates that it is an array. And typically when we use arrays, we also pass in the size that is being used. So I'm passing an integer variable that's going to designate the size. Remember, in a prototype line, I only need to have the data types, and so I don't have to actually have variable names there. Last but not least, before main, the static class variable has to be initialized. So this line of code, the data type, the class it's being attached to, which is budget, attached with the scope resolution operator, the : and then the variable name corporate budget is assigned 0. That is assigning 0 to my static level variable that's in budget. So I'm going to start all corporate budgets at 0. I am going to take some time to talk through these next few lines of code because it talks about and creates arrays and works with arrays, which we haven't worked with a lot. And in your semester project, you will be using arrays. Or you will be using structures like arrays, whether they are arrays of objects or whether there's something called vectors or arrays of structures. You're going to be using something like arrays, and so you'll want to be following and using these standards that we use. One is that we want to use a constant to represent the number of divisions or the size that the array is going to be. So I've declared a constant for the number of divisions. The next line of code is a little bit different. You might be used to working with integer arrays where we do something like int scores bracket, and we might do something like 20, something like that. Well, we're doing the same thing except we're using a object instead of a primitive. So our object's a budget, and the name of my array is called divisions, and I have a constant instead of the 20. And the constant is preferred way to set up arrays when you're setting up the size, but it's similar to this line of code here if I were to have just an array of scores. And I have a local variable set to 0 for the amount requested for each budget. Remember, in C++, if you don't assign a value 0 to this, it might give an error or throw an error message that says you have an uninitialized variable. It did not. We'll just go ahead and run our program. Make it easy. Make them all 300. So you can see this is what our output's going to take a look like. Notice on the output that I'm telling it what division to enter for, and it looks like we might need to add a space there. And I also have the outputted to 2 decimal places here, and I do have a $sign here. These should probably have a $sign as well. So we might fix that as we go. I am going to assign that a value of 0, however, because if you don't assign something in C++ an initial value, it does assign it garbage, and so I always like to initialize those variables. When working with arrays, we will use a definite loop, which is the for loop. We will start the for loop at an index of 0, and it will go from I less than the number of divisions. You need it to go less than the number of divisions because remember, the indices on an array start at 0. So I will have 4 elements, but they're going to go 0, 1, 2, 3 for the indices. And so I start at 0 and I go to less than the number of divisions. So my highest index being used is 3, and then I increment 1 at a time. Here's my prompt for entering the division, and I'm just going to go ahead and put in a space to make that look a little bit nicer. Notice how I'm getting it to print division 1. When index is 0, 0 plus 1 is 1. When index is 1, I'm at the second element, so 1 plus 1 is 2. So this is has an offset by 1 because I'm always off by 1. And then I input the amount requested, and then this line of code is a little bit unique. If we take a look at it, I'm accessing a budget object. My first budget object in this array is divisions bracket 0. I use bracket I because it's going to go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, but I'm going to take the I, which is 0 right now if I run it the very first time, and I'm going to access the add budget method that's in my class. If I go back to my class and I look at the add budget method, remember it takes in an amount, and it's going to then add that amount to the division budget, and then it's going to set the corporate budget as well. Now, every time through, the division budget gets rewritten. Basically, every time I create or have a new budget object, that division budget starts at 0, but the corporate budget keeps tallying. So when I get done, as you saw on the screen, the corporate budget adds up all of them. Going back to my driver then, I decided to display the budget, and I wanted to use or show how to use a method that accepts an array as a parameter. I also wanted it to output in fixed format, so I did set precision to show point fixed, and I only need that line of code once before all of my output. So then all of my output will get printed with that format after this point. I have a header for the report. I only want that printed once, so I'm printing that before I go to print report because I know that print report is just going to print each division using a loop. And then this is how you send an array. To send an array, you use the name of the array. My array is called divisions. It's a budget array, and I just send divisions in, just the name. That is also passed by reference, okay? So when you pass an array, you use the name, and it is actually a reference to the array that's being passed by reference. And then I'm sending in the constant for the number of divisions. If we scroll down and look at my print report method, the way that you accept an array is you have to designate the array type, you name a local variable to hold the array, all divisions, and you have to have a bracket. If you don't have the bracket here, it won't accept it. An error message will be thrown, and it will probably say that something is, IntelliSense says no operator bracket matches these operands, so it's trying to tell you that it needs to be an array. And then I'm sending in a constant size for the size of the array, and I just output the division, and it has a budget of, and I think we remembered we were going to put a $sign here. And last but not least then, transfer of control from this goes back to main. It goes where we left off. And notice my use of white space to kind of spread out the declarations, and then filling the array, and then doing some printing, and then my final print statement. The total budget request is, and I'm going to access the get corporate budget method here, but in order to access the get corporate budget, I have to have a budget object. So I just use the first array element, divisions bracket 0 dot get corporate budget. I could use any one of the divisions if I wanted to. I could do divisions bracket 1 dot get corporate budget, and I hit tab when that's highlighted to fill it in. That would do the same thing. I just have to use one of my budget objects in order to access get corporate budget, and then I can output it. And we saw how it executed before, but let's run it one more time to see if our output got cleaned up just a little bit. So enter the budget request for each division. So this is 1 for division 1. I probably should say for division 1. And so enter a budget, and I'm going to enter different amounts here so you can see that every time through, each of the individual division budgets is set, but my budget request for all the divisions gets totaled up using that static class variable. That should wrap up this tutorial on creating the budget driver to go with the budget class, and it showed us how to work with that static class member variable, an array of objects, and how to make sure that you use the budget, you do the pound include, budget.h. Whether it's inline or not, you need to have that if you're working with classes. That should be it.